Those of you who have not had to deal with the press, consider yourself lucky. They can come across as being very nice, and it's in print, and message now. So you should have some basic things under your belt. Katherine Bulava is from Catholic Communications. Is that your communications company?
It is, yes.
It is, okay. Well, with no further ado, Katherine Bulava, welcome to FEBE.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. I sometimes think of myself as technologically challenged, even though my team would disagree, so bear with me here. Thank you so much for the introduction. I didn't hear all of it, so if I repeat it, oh well. So normally I kind of just start out by telling you a little bit about myself and about Catholic Communications, which is my firm. I started it in January of 2010, and we are a full-service public relations firm, and we offer public relations, media relations, digital media, and graphic design services. We work with clients in community and economic development, neighborhood revitalization, and foreclosure prevention. And we help those clients establish themselves as leaders and innovators by increasing their exposure and extending their reach. So generally when I say that, unless you're specifically like a community development corporation, you're like, what in the world does that mean? So I like to explain it. Basically, we do a very broad interpretation of community and economic development. We're looking for clients that have a direct positive impact on the world around them. So in reality, what that translates into is we work with nonprofits, and we work with a lot of social enterprises and social entrepreneurs, businesses that feel that either their product or their service or just, they've been in business for a long time and they want to give back and create a positive impact if their product doesn't do so directly. So that you know a little bit more about me. Prior to starting Catholic Communications, I served as the communications director for Cleveland City Council. I was there for 5 years and 3 terms, and I was the youngest person to have held that position. So I think it's always appropriate when you get the introduction of like, well, if you don't know media, they could be kind of scary. So not being, in the heart of Cuyahoga County, but I assume that most of you guys are still familiar with what happened in politics from 2004 to 2010 in Cuyahoga County. It was an interesting time. So I got to learn by fire and really learn how to deal with crisis in media. And really came out having some fantastic relationships with reporters to this very day. So sometimes, people are kind of shocked by that, but realistically, it's, they're people and they're doing a job, and so are we. So it's just about setting up the right relationship and being fair. So I have more than a decade of political campaign experience. I've been the communications director, I've been a campaign manager, a strategist, or expert consultant. So I've come in, worked on both sides of the aisle. I like to say that I'm politically neutral in public. It doesn't mean I am in private. But to me, it's really about the passion of the candidate and my ability, or my belief that they have the ability to do what it is that they promise to do, whether or not I agree with them personally. I started my career prior to moving into communications as a freelance journalist and also covering local politics and community and economic development. So it's kind of been a passion of mine for a long time. And I have a bachelor's in English and a master's in communications management from John Carroll University. So that's all you're going to hear about me, but I do find it important to tell you a little bit about myself. It establishes credibility, and we're going to talk about that in terms of establishing relationships with the press. So it's all relevant. So I have given this presentation a number of different ways and a number of times, and what I've found is people have certain questions that they want to ask, and there are certain questions that when our clients, some of which are really not all that excited about the idea of being in the press, ask us very often. So rather than kind of give you a lecture, I thought let me just toss out a series of questions and answer them. And I'm also rather informal, so even though it looks like I'm pretty much following the script, if you have a question and you want to just shout it out and interrupt me, I'm totally cool with going with the flow, so whatever you want. So the first, and which I think is a great way to start, is why is media coverage valuable? So in a sense, or in the simplest terms, getting the word out about who you are and what you do establishes you as a resource to the public, lets them know that you exist, and that should generate work for you. So that's the end goal for everybody, right? Establishing yourself as a credible organization or business by talking about your successes sets you up to gain partners, and it can expand what you accomplish. It can gain you funding, either through personal investors or by people that are interested. It could potentially bring you more people that want to work with you, even in a situation where you don't really need that kind of thing. It's still the case, because the more competent you appear, the more likely you get approached to either launch something or work with somebody or do something interesting that you may not even thought of. So we're talking about opportunities that may or may not have come your way. You don't have to think of everything, but the point is to be out there and available. And what I find really the most important is if you don't set the tone to tell your story, someone else will. And what they have to say isn't necessarily nice, isn't necessarily accurate. We run into this all the time. We have people come to us and basically say, this is what we do. We don't think that even our clients or the people that we work with on a daily basis have any clue what that really is. Like, they only work with us for this one tiny little thing, and this is what they see us as. They don't understand the big picture. So getting out there and telling your story your way is a way to counteract that. So why is it that some places seem to get all the press coverage? And I get this question all the time. My competitor is out there. It seems like they're always calling him for all these quotes. Why is that? So they're doing fantastic things, but so are you. So yes, you do deserve the coverage as well. So what causes you to get it? Sometimes we get lucky, or something that we do something so intrinsically valuable that we get de facto coverage. The right person found out about the right thing, and it gets to the right people, and they call you. But most of the time, the organizations that you see in the press over and over and over again are there because they put in the time to develop those relationships. They actively seek out news coverage, and they have a media strategy. So that person that randomly gets called as a strategist, yeah, every once in a while it's because they've known that reporter since they were like 4 years old and they went to preschool together. But most of the time, it's because there's somebody in a corporate communications office that has established that relationship, that has pitched that person over and over again, that monitors all the media that happens, that every single time something on that topic pops up, they send a tweet and say, hey, we have an opinion. So there's a lot more work behind it than you would think. So how do you do that? How do you develop those relationships? I like to start from the basics. So follow the news in your industry. There's all kinds of services that you can pay for. Meltwater is a very popular one. I feel like, especially talking to a group of entrepreneurs, that's not something I really encourage. And we've actually found that we can do it better if we set up Google alerts, because, Google's fantastic. And if you use the right key terms, you can really find everything that you need. So you can consider a service, but you really don't need it. Google lets you do this manageably, so you can get an email every single time something pops up. Some of us like that. Some of us like to get it once a week, and you can set it up to do that as well. So what do you do with all these alerts? We suggest creating a database of coverage and breaking it up into different things. So coverage that you receive, and the coverage that the industry receives, and then listing that out by the type of outlet that's covering the reporter, and maybe giving yourself some keywords so that the next time you're doing something in that field, you can go into your database and search that key term and say, oh, these 6 reporters covered that in a positive way. I might want to talk to them. And that's it. Now you know who covers you. I say that's it, but it's an everyday thing, and you do have to keep track of it, because reporters leave, they find new jobs just like everybody else, so you can't just make this list once and walk away. So what do you do once you know who they are? You reach out and you interact with them. The same way that you go to a networking meeting or you go to lunch. Especially when I talk to some older folks, I think social media has erased this for the younger generation a little bit. They view reporters more as dignitaries, as people that, are basically just untouchable. And that isn't true. These are folks, especially in Northeast Ohio, a lot of the reporters are from Northeast Ohio. They grew up with you. They're people. Don't be afraid of them. So how do you react to them? You repost one of their pieces on your social media, praise it, tag them in it. So it's not that you're just reposting their stuff, you're letting them know that you did it. Most reporters today are get paid by click, so this matters to them and they watch it. Don't think that they don't. Tweet them a compliment, include an intelligent commentary, email them additional facts and figures, give them something interesting about you that they didn't know, but make it relevant. Don't just randomly send them stuff, because people send them stuff all the time. Tie it into something that matters. And then also introduce yourself and just suggest yourself as a valuable resource. Hey, I saw that you wrote a story about this. We've been in this industry for 15 years. I just started this new startup. I would love to tell you about it. Do you have time for coffee? Really that simple. And at that point, once you sit down to that coffee, you don't want to sit there and just be like, hey, this is me, and sell yourself like you would be pitching. You want to give them a reason to talk to you. So here's how we can be valuable. Yes, you want the coverage, but you also want to convince them that they need it. Realize that reporters don't view themselves as salespeople, and if you give them a sales pitch, they will refer you to the sales department. So what's a story? It isn't their job to sell their product for you. It's their job to tell something interesting that has a general impact on the community. So a lot of times small businesses would be like, well, I don't get it. Like McDonald's is in the news every day, Chipotle is in the news every day. Well, these are large publicly held companies. So, and it's always fun to talk about when people do something wrong, because let's just look at the coverage. I mean, more of it is negative than positive. But when they do something positive, why does it have a direct impact on the community that these reporters talk to? Because people own stock. So if you're not a publicly held company and you're doing the same exact thing as McDonald's did by changing an ingredient, realize that might not be news, because it doesn't affect anybody except for maybe like your favorite customer that is either going to be like, oh my God, that's fantastic, or it's horrible. So you have to look at, what are your real stories, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So seeking out news coverage. When we talked about creating that database, we transformed that into a media list. And make sure that you have that contact information and keep it up to date. I know that sounds rather like a hard undertaking, and easiest way to do that, every time you send out a ton of emails, you're going to get some bounce backs from reporters that left, quit, whatever. A lot of them have that like, hey, I no longer do this, contact this person, write that down, put it in, and like everything else. So labor intensive, but worth maintaining. And then the other thing is, if you haven't been able to find out who it is that you should be talking to, just call them and ask. It's harder and harder to find, but you can generally find the general numbers, even if that's the 1-800 number. Call the advertising department, say I want to talk to the news desk. They will forward you. On that point, you say, I do this, I'm in this area, who covers me, could you tell me who that reporter is? And they'll either tell you or transfer you. So for TV stations, it used to be that you need to know reporters. You still do, but realistically, TV news, like they assign that day, that morning. So it's just invaluable, and even more valuable to have a relationship with the assignment editor at the news desk. So you could just call the general number, start talking to those people, be nice. And they're really busy, so be concise. So next part to seeking out news coverage is to send out, again, we're going back to concise, well-written, concise, and informative press releases. So what does that mean? That if you think that you have a really cool background story for your business, you can include that as a section at the bottom, but don't fill up the first 3 paragraphs before you tell the news, because they will never get to what your actual news is. Start with the most important things up front. Use bullet points, demonstrate your value. So starting out with, we're doing this launch of this type of product. It's going to help these type of individuals, and therefore, it's going to have this impact on the community within the first three or four sentences. And then provide an opportunity for interviews. So when I say real people, this is something that I learned working in politics, that talking heads are talking heads, but realistically, as much as you want to be in the news because you're the CEO or you're the most important person, they don't really want to talk to you, because you, sitting on the couch at the end of the day, who do you want to hear from? Well, you want to hear from the customer that says, oh my gosh, this is so fantastic. Or think about the type of news that you watch. The lady that's like, oh my God, they saved my kitten, or wow, they insulted my children because they didn't have the right dietary options. So this is who they want to talk to. So establish those relationships with your customers as well, and be able to provide an immediate interview. So it might seem like they go out there and randomly talk to people, and they do that, but reporters are really busy, and if you can say, hey, I can give you 4 people that that experienced this, and you can control that story because you know what those people experienced, you know what they think of you, and you can put that forward. And then the next step to that is conduct media follow-up. So don't assume that somebody will see your release, call you, and ask you about it. We did a media pitch yesterday, or started a media pitch yesterday. We sent out to 400 people on a media list that's targeted for this specific industry, and nobody responded. So the client who's never done media before is like, oh no, nobody likes me. And it's like, no, that's totally normal because they've gotten, maybe 200-300 other emails that day. Pick up the phone, call, say, hey, did you get the email? Send a follow-up email with a nice headline that says, do you want this story? It's really important, deadline today, type of thing, something to get them to click on it. And be annoying. I learned this. I mean, it seems silly, and a lot of us are really sensitive about it and counterintuitive, but I learned it as a journalist that if you want a story, and my deadline is 5 p.m. and it's 2 p.m. and I haven't talked to my source, my editor is going to tell me to call that source 30 times. So reporters are trained to be annoying. So if you call them 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times, they'll call you back. And they're not going to get annoyed necessarily the way that you would get annoyed by a telemarketer because this is what they do for a living. And they do it to other people, and it's been inbred in them that this is what I do in order to get my information. So don't feel so bad. I know I'm going to have some of my reporter friends be like, don't tell people that. I don't want to get inundated. But realistically, you have to break through the clutter. You're going to read all these blogs out there that say, oh, don't email a reporter, don't tweet a reporter, don't call a reporter. Well, you know what? You got to get in touch with a reporter. So depending on the mood of that reporter, they're going to say, I prefer contact this way. Once you establish that relationship, you can figure it out and you can reach out to them that way. But in the meantime, it's just like doing sales. So, get over the hump and just get out there. The other thing is, I always say pick 10 to 20. If you pick 50 or 60, it's going to be impossible to tell. If you pick 2 or 3 and they don't like it, you might just be hitting up a wall. So, pick 10 to 20 folks that you can target consistently and start to establish that relationship with them. So what is a good story, right? Because in order to get in the press, you need to have something to tell. So something unique, a major milestone that sets you apart from others, a program or product launch, but there's a caveat to this. What makes your product different from the competition? Is it something that's nobody else offered? Does it address a real need? Does it, how does it change the world? You really want to answer that question because there's a million products out there. So can you say I'm the first in the industry in the area? Can you say I'm using a different type of ingredient? I'm doing something different? Because the fact that you're launching something that's news to you, but in order to make it news to everybody, you have to find that sales point. A lot of people think that, I'm doing an event, I should send out a press release. Yes, absolutely send out a press release, but don't be surprised if it doesn't get coverage. Especially in large cities, events are not that big of a deal. If you're in a township and you're one of 15 events that happens all year long, people they're going to print that. But it just kind of depends on where you are. Nevertheless, most media outlets have events calendars. So if you're doing a grand opening or something, you can list yourself in the events calendar. A lot of places have PSA type stuff, so public service announcement. In order to do a public service announcement, you have to be doing something charitable. So if you're doing a raffle at your grand opening event of your new store, and you're going to donate that to a charity, now you have a public service announcement. So you need to think about those types of things. So things that I tell people to try to judge whether or not it's a good story, because in our own heads it's easy to get stuck in that, is if you think you're doing something cool and your friends, when you go and have wine or dinner, think it's cool too, and they don't do exactly the same thing you do and use all the same industry terms that you do and still think it's cool, then chances are the press might feel the same way and the public at large might feel the same way. So nice, simple, easy way to think about it. The other thing is different reporters are interested in different things. So understanding how different publications make editorial choices will help you understand what might get covered. You can go back to the media pitch that we're working on right now. It's for a real estate company. We called the Associated Press. They said, that's really fantastic. We've got 2 people in our office. We're covering the RNC. Can you give me something more specific? Can I do it in 6 months? So understanding that the AP has 1 person in their press office and there's something huge going on that's of national scale, It's kind of one of those things that's like, okay, maybe they're not the best place to pitch. For something like that, calling the real estate importer at Cranes might make more sense. So it's just a matter of understanding who's going to be most interested in your story, and you get that over time. Before you figure it out, set aside enough time to call everybody and be okay with being rejected. Like I said, it's just like sales. If you have a good relationship with a reporter, also don't be afraid to just call them up and ask them if something is newsworthy. And I do this all the time too. We have relationships with editors and people at news desks. We pick up the phone and we say, hey, we have a client who's thinking about doing this. We're not really sure what the best angle would be. Is this something that you guys would even consider? And they're usually pretty open to say like, hey, this would be a story, hey, this wouldn't be. However, realize that when you pick up the phone and there's a chance that that reporter is going to get super excited about your idea, you need to be ready to give them a scoop. And if you're really, really not ready to pitch, then you need to be sure that when you pick up the phone and they answer it, the first thing you say is, hey, I'm not ready to go public with this. Are you willing to talk to me about it anyway? Wait until you actually get the yes. Don't just keep going. And then start asking your questions. But like I said, they're people, these are relationships, so you just establish them and then you can have those actual conversations. I like to talk about what's not newsworthy at the same time, so you can kind of get that on your list. So I mentioned it before already, the press is really not interested in making you money. They don't want to be salespeople. They get insulted when you pass them what they think is advertising. But that being said, they do want to know what's special about your product, service, event if you can give them that, like, this is what's going to change the world about it. Fundraisers are not news unless they have a major headliner or a clever theme. That being said, like I mentioned, they're a great way to get yourself in those PSA events calendars. So flip side, you still can actually get some free publicity off of it. And then finally, and I think this is important because I think when we have this fantastic idea, especially as entrepreneurs, we think that like, this is national news and it should be in the New York Times. And we do get clients that ask us that, that they've just started out and they don't have any revenue yet and they want to be, on Face the Nation or Meet the Press or whatever. Now you have to realize that the scale of coverage that you get matches the feat that you're publicizing. So using politics as an example, if you just change national policy in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, that's national news. If you're in a tiny township and you change where the stop sign goes, that's still relevant to the township and maybe the surrounding area, but it's not national news. So translate that into your own product and what your business is doing, and understand where your scale is. So identify which coverage is valuable to you as well. Not all coverage is equal, and some gets you more exposure. So understand your media and your core audience, who watches, reads, and listens to, and how do you do that? Know your customers. It's the same way that you sell to them. Know your customers, know what they read, know what they're interested in. That tells you where to advertise. It also tells you where to look for your publicity. So how do you do that? You conduct internal surveys. You can kind of just start asking people, put a checkbox next to the cash register. There's lots of ways to do that without costing a lot of money. There's SurveyMonkey that you can do it for free if you don't ask too many questions. You can purchase demographic information, or you can request it per media outlet. They will usually provide this to you. Generally, the reporter probably doesn't know, but if you call the advertising department and pretend that you're going to buy an ad, they will fall over backwards to give you this information. And you can push for it, because the larger the outlet, sometimes they haven't really found out, like, oh yeah, we have, this many women. Well, how old are they? Are they between 65 and 80? If you're working in senior, that might really make a difference. If they're in their 20s, that might not be valuable to you. So just keep asking those questions until you can kind of figure out who reads them or who watches them. Target major local outlets and industry news media as a general rule, and then add specialty outlets to that list based on your search. So when I said go back, when you're doing that initial tracking, that's where you start to find your pop-up bloggers and all of that stuff, and you can add those to the list. So the tiny little community paper that may only print 300 things and drop at coffee shops, if that's where all your customers are, that's totally worth your effort. So again, it's realizing who reads what. And the other thing is you can totally make an enemy out of snubbing someone who thinks that they want to report on you. I'm gonna go back to the little tiny local newspaper as an example, or the tiny little local blogger that you're like, whatever, they're not valuable, but you know what? If they're down the street from your business and they're really annoyed that your customers park in front of their driveway and they're gonna blog about that, that can be a major problem. So reaching out in advance and kind of establishing that relationship, even if you think that they're kind of pain in the butt over here, being nice and extending that olive branch and trying to work with them will often avoid that whole tantrum online or that coverage that you really don't want to get. So, you can't always predict that. Sometimes people sneak out of the woodwork, and we'll talk about crisis, but this is just one of those ways, like, especially if you know that there's somebody out there in the community that tends to do that, to reach out to them. I'm gonna go through this in a really quick way in terms of telling your story in a compelling way, because we already talked about it. I just like to beat people over the head with it. So stating immediate key facts first, demonstrating value, quoting real people, having your customers available as an interview. Please vet your customers if you're going to do that. Like, actually prep them, have like a conversation. This is what they're going to ask you. Find out what their answer is, because we've had clients do this. Oh, we have this fantastic customer, they love our product. And then you get them on camera and they're like, yeah, it was okay. I mean, this one thing didn't really work, and then it's too late. So talk to them first. Provide as much information as you think might be useful. You can give them a ton of stuff, but do it in attachments, bullet points, links to more information. Don't send an email that's never going to go through the server because it's so huge. Don't send 10 paragraphs because they're never going to read it. And don't start out by selling. So the same stuff that you use in your advertising, lots of exclamation points, those statements that like, we're the most fantastic thing ever. Rather than putting that in your press release, do it as a conversational, informational, this is what we have to offer. And then, of course, having a media strategy, right? So most of us don't really think about this, but the beauty of having one is that you know in advance what you want to talk about, to whom, and when. So you should be setting an agenda for your business. At the same time, you can take the additional thought to say, okay, what about this might be a media opportunity, and overlay that. So set a calendar at the beginning of the year and adjust it and update it quarterly at the very least. If you're just having one of those amazing years and you're growing 300%, you might want to update it a little bit more often than that. And then be familiar with the deadlines or the outlets that want it to cover you. So a daily is a daily, that's pretty easy, you can pitch every day. But if you've got a quarterly publication, chances are that they actually put their stuff together 6 weeks in advance of the publication date. So even though they come out in May, if you've got something going on, you better tell them, at the beginning of or middle of March in order to get into that publication. And a lot of times we're just not thinking 6 weeks in advance. So when you know those deadlines and you have a calendar, you don't miss them. And then finally, give yourself a month to 6 weeks of lead time to do any sort of media event. Do you really desperately need it? Can you not pull it off if something comes up 2 days before and you want to get in the press? No, you can pull it off. You can drive yourself absolutely crazy and you'll get it done, because this is what we do. But if you have the time and you can do it right and not drive yourself nuts and have less of a chance that you're going to drop the ball or miss an opportunity, planning is a good thing. And then if your piece doesn't get picked up, it's not the end of the world. And it doesn't mean that you worked really hard and that's just going to go to waste. You wrote a press release, put it on a blog, put it out on your social media, send it out in an e-blast to your customers. The local observers are papers that are citizen reporting. Sign yourself up as a reporter and submit it. They'll probably, there's a chance that they could print it word for word. So there's always another chance. And then if you're hosting an event to draw out press, I always caution clients against this because you're putting a lot of work into it and you're getting a lot of hopes up. Media is not what it was 30 years ago. So though a lot of us in this room probably grew up in the age of the press conference, and people still do press conferences, but there has to be like a gimmick. You've got to have something jumping around. If you want to do the whole Trump thing and have dancers, that's stuff that media writes about, right? I don't encourage that, by the way. But it did in fact get written about, so I'm just trying to prove a point there. But I always say just have a secondary purpose that has intrinsic value to your organization. So if you're doing an event that's a grand opening, the intrinsic value there is to invite your customers to see the place. If you're doing like an awards ceremony or you're announcing, we work with a lot of real estate. So if you're doing a ribbon cutting, and you want the press to come out and see, get that shot of you with the scissors and all of that, absolutely try for that. But also invite the community, invite your stakeholders, invite your investors, so that at the end of the day, there's twofold, because the camera will actually pan around and see that there's other people interested in your stuff. But two, if nobody shows up, you still got value out of that. So you didn't because media is just a form of marketing and communication, so how can you double up your efforts? And then I promised I would talk about crisis. I think we're at about 35 minutes, so it was 30 to 40 in questions. So I'm going to just kind of run through crisis, because I know that there's a lot of people ask about it, and that's really where a big fear note is, and then we'll just kind of open up the floor. So first thing I'd like to say about crisis is, while not all of it can be predicted, and that's the one that we're always the most afraid of, a lot of it actually can. Even the stuff that you think maybe can't be, actually can if you really sit down and plan. So have a contingency plan in place. What should be a part of that? So include a point person and an alternate who's responsible for talking to the press. If that person happens to have pneumonia, is in the bathroom, whatever, who else can talk to the press? Have general talking points about issues that may be of contention. So if you've made a product and you're working with somebody out of South America, and there's like even the slightest chance that maybe some rare bug that only lives in the quarter mile that like this factory is in could be in danger because of your product, have a contingency plan in place for that. What are your talking points? We had no idea. We're going to look for another vendor, whatever. Have those talking points in place. And I'm trying to do like extreme things so that, but the point comes across with stuff that's less out there as well. And then, saying that we're sorry is the first part. We get a lot of these, hashtag sorry not sorry things these days. Mean it. They can tell. And what's the best way to mean it? By saying, I'm sorry, this is what I'm going to do to fix it. And not, I'm sorry I put my foot in my mouth, I'm sorry, the same way that like if you tell your significant other that you're sorry and they're like, yeah, no you're not, you're just trying to get me to shut up. Like, the press can feel that too. So the action steps and how a situation can be remedied are really important. The other thing is tell the truth. I always say err on the side of oversharing. The lawyer always says err on the side of not sharing at all. If it's a situation that may or may not get legal, please include the lawyer in the conversation. But I always say err on the side of oversharing, because if there's something that you're really worried that might get out and there's any chance that it could get out, think about the fact that if it does get out and you didn't talk about it, then you're in trouble. If you think that something might leak out, sharing it yourself allows you to control the narrative. We get this all the time with the politician that had an affair. Just admit you had the affair, because if 6 months later there's a video that comes out, your career's kind of over. And it's not true. I mean, I think everybody knows in today's world that having an affair in and of itself doesn't end a political career, but lying about it forever can. And I think that's like the easiest example of how to realize that. The other thing is, if you get caught off guard, you never have to talk to the press right then and there, and a lot of us don't realize that. First of all, we live in the world of caller ID, so use it. If you don't recognize the number, you don't have to answer it. And we generally tell our clients don't answer calls from reporters. So like once you do have that reporter's number, put it in your phone. And don't answer it. So counterintuitive, because you want press, right? Well, they'll leave you a message. And then from the message, you should generally be able to gather, oh, it's good news, fantastic, can't wait to call them back. Or, oh, it might be bad news, I might want to talk to some folks about what it could potentially be before I call them back. So if they don't say why they're calling and you're suspicious for whatever reason, have a staff person call them back and politely inquire what it is, set a time to speak for them and what it's about. If they absolutely refuse to tell your person at all what it's about, be suspicious. Because there's really no reason for them to say, to absolutely refuse to say what it is that they want to talk to you about unless they're trying to catch you off guard. If you do accidentally pick up, you can always say that you're busy, ask for the deadline and their questions. They may not give you questions, and they certainly may not give your staff the questions, but it's always worth asking, and then say that you'll get back to them. Even if this is a good story, if they catch you off guard and you're in the middle of doing something else, there's a good chance you're not going to give the best answer. And then you're going to be watching the news, and you're going to be like, oh my God, that's so cool, my company is on the news. Man, I really should have told them that we do this too. So giving yourself the extra time is always worth it. And then even if you get quartered, inviting a reporter to meet with you later in the day instead of running away on camera usually works. So what do I mean by this? When I was working at City Hall, one of Channel 19's favorite things to do was to corner the politicians in the elevator and be like, why did you say this? And you can't move because you're in the back of the elevator. So there were certain things that we did to try to prevent this from happening. We had relationships with the parking lot attendants and the security guards at the front desk. If these people were walking into the building, we got calls. So, that's unfortunate. But if your entire job is to be the investigative reporter that gets the camera shots of people running away from you, you actually don't take it personally. I have relationships with Tom Meyer and Carl Monday. They're fine people. They know that this is what they do for a living. So, it is what it is. But the other thing is if you're on camera and you look away or you try to stay silent and you're saying no comment, that's the clip that's going to run again and again and again. But if you just look straight at the camera and say, I'm really sorry, but I would really like to pull some information up about that, and I'd invite you to come speak with me later. They might not speak with you later. They might run a different story, but they're not going to run a clip of you being terrified because that particular clip has no intrinsic value on the news. Because what it says to their viewership is oh, hey, look, they're badgering this guy and he was willing to talk to them. So at least it avoids that awful clip, right? So this is about minimizing damage. So don't look, like I said, don't look away, don't cover your face, look right at the camera and say what you mean. I mean, if it's a dire situation and you don't want to talk and the plan is to release a statement, look at the camera and say you're going to release a statement. It's always better to be firm, look like you're in control of your company and in control of your situation than it is to look afraid. And then finally, don't sit silently and let somebody else tell your story. This is true of crisis, but this is true of everything. So release a statement, hold a controlled news conference to address the issue. How do you do a controlled news conference? So Mayor Jackson is actually really good at this. He will hold an invite in the Red Room and only invite certain press and talk to those press. And then that group of individuals has the opportunity to tell the story first. Reporters like these relationships. They want the scoop. So if you have a relationship over time, then you have an opportunity to have a way to address crisis. And then you don't have to do it on the media's time, but we live in the age of the 24-hour news cycle. So if you sit on it for a day, it's too late. Realize that you need to drop your stuff and deal with the crisis when it arises. And then finally, don't be embarrassed about professional assistance. It's not a sign of weakness or guilt. If you're afraid of going to jail, you're going to hire a lawyer. A crisis is an opportunity to ruin the reputation of your company permanently, so it's the same thing. Don't be afraid to ask for professional assistance when you need it. Having that spokesperson might get you a story or two about oh, look how awful they are. They hired a lawyer or they hired a spokesperson, but at the end of the day, that spokesperson knows what they're doing and they're going to help you out. It's your reputation. Respect the gravity of the situation and understand it. Sometimes you need it and sometimes you don't. And then make the right choice that's right for your company. So, my big conclusion is always when we talk about press, and especially when I'm talking to entrepreneurs and we want to do everything immediately, realize that establishing relationships with the press takes time. Not everything that you think should get covered is going to get covered. Some stuff you really wish didn't get covered will get covered. Don't hold grudges against reporters forever just because one of those stories had a line about something stupid you did in high school that was 20 years ago. Doesn't mean all of them will. Tell another story so it overshadows it. Not ever talking to that reporter again is actually just going to hurt you in the long run because now you've created an adversarial relationship and you've given them a reason to write something nasty every time. So if the main thing is if you don't actively pursue it, you're not going to get it, or you're only going to get it in a way that you don't want it. So taking the time to address this is really worth it to make sure that you don't miss out.
Okay, we'll take one more question.
Thank you. This was fun.